So in this video, I'm going to field a cluster of questions that I have been getting specifically about COVID-19 and what to do in light of it, what's likely coming. Before I answer any of the questions, I want to go ahead and sort of answer a question that I would be asking if I were you. What perspective are you coming from, Virgil, and why should I care? So currently I live in Europe. I have a family. That's a place that some of my perspective and concerns come from. I currently help to oversee strategy and global operations for a medium-sized international nonprofit organization. So what that means is a lot of my information isn't coming from politically motivated pundits or news channels in the United States. Some of it is, but a large part of it isn't. That's a perspective that's different from what many of you are exposed to. Also, my concerns are not only for the neighborhood that I live in or the country that I live in. I am forced to reckon with COVID-19's potential impact in scores of countries and how that will play out differently in each country over time, and how that staggering of timelines will affect the whole global picture. I'm on a team that routinely has to prognosticate. We have to look forward and identify of all the potential futures, and given all of the enormous number of unknowns, what's most likely to happen and what has most likely already happened. And on that team, there are a lot of really smart people. Before I did this, years and years ago, I was a biologist for a little while. So I also bring to these considerations some knowledge of the field. I am not an epidemiologist, nor am I a world leader. However, if I were a world leader, I would have listened to the epidemiologists. All right, so the first question, what are my thoughts on a Christian response to lockdown or compliance with lockdown, or how should we view governments insisting on people locking down? I don't actually have like a political opinion on this, but here's what I know. Math is math and science is science. There are mathematicians who get things wrong, and there are scientists who get things wrong, and sometimes scientists, not so much mathematicians, but definitely scientists, make leaps that they're not aware of. Faith leaps, conclusions that they would insist are science, but when in fact they're just faith. However, inside science is kind of the repeatable, verifiable, obvious kinds of things. Like, for example, exactly the same thing seems to have happened in China, that happened in Italy, that happened in Spain, and is happening in both Italy and Spain still, and it is now happening in the United States. It's also happening in Great Britain, and it's happening in France, and it's happening in Belgium, and it's happening in Germany, and it's happening just about the same way everywhere. The places that locked down sooner and more thoroughly are having fewer people in their ICUs at the same time. And for that reason, those places are not having the same kind of death tolls that the places that lock down later are, or will. Why is that? Is it because these countries have more old people in them and that's why their death tolls are higher? Maybe that's part of it, but that's probably not the whole picture. Because what happens when a whole bunch of people flood a hospital at the same time is that even though doctors and nurses are heroic, and they are truly heroic, they wear out and they wear down and they lose their ability to think objectively and they make mistakes, and people die who didn't have to die. Sometimes they die because there aren't enough people to intubate them or to put them on a ventilator. Sometimes people who have a non-COVID related heart attack die in a hospital that's overrun with COVID patients simply because they can't get the care that they normally could get. There are people who die in these hospitals not because they have COVID, but because everyone else also has COVID, and there aren't enough people to take care of them. So the way that we can love our neighbor best is by locking down. And I know that that has economic impact. And I'm glad that I'm not called upon to make those decisions. But this is how an exponential curve works. It feels like gradually, until then it feels like all of a sudden. It doesn't feel like a slow climb. It feels like nothing's really going on and then everything happened. And there's no time between it's gonna and it did. Decisions that are made early in an exponential situation are always better than decisions that are made late. And I'm telling you that not from a position of kind of looking back over my shoulder. Our nonprofit made a decision to lock all of our people down days before government started doing it. Because math and science and wisdom, you cannot be wise if you ignore facts. Another question I get with some frequency is about treatments, potential treatments, especially chloroquine and human plasma antibodies. So here are my thoughts. Again, I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV. I don't even play one on YouTube. The conversation about chloroquine has been also politicized in the United States. It is a malaria drug, and it seems in some cases to have good effect. I think Anthony Fauci is absolutely right. It needs to be studied. And along the way, it can be studied and used mercifully, compassionate use. But even let's say it works. Let's say it's a miracle drug and it works. That will help people who are already sick. It may slow the filling of ICUs. It may turn down the death count. But it doesn't change the infection rate. Now, it might have an indirect effect on the infection rate by making people who are sick for less time. But much of the infection is happening, or at least some of the infection is happening, when people who are asymptomatic are spreading the disease. So even if chloroquine's a magic drug, which so far there is doubt about that, it won't change the infection rate significantly, and it is not a miracle answer. It does not change the fact that lockdown has to happen, must stay happening, and will have to happen again. I read this morning, or maybe yesterday, something very hopeful about synthetic antibodies. But even then, the effect of antibodies lasts about 8 weeks. And your body doesn't magically just grow antibodies because you had some put in you. So it's probably going to have good applications for the military or for first responders, medical personnel, maybe the police, possibly people who are on the edge of very sick, who are already sick. But nothing is going to change in real life. Nothing's going to meaningfully change in this game until there are a lot of reliable treatments that are very good and a vaccine or herd immunity. To get to herd immunity in an internationalized world, a global world that we've got now, that we live in real life, 50% of the world's population has to have had this virus. That's a lot. That's a great many people. And that's a great many people inside that number that would have to have died. So that leads me to the third question. What is likely to happen next? I think the most likely scenario is a series of lockdowns and gradual openings, partial openings. We're noticing this already in Asia. Countries that successfully beat this virus back are now having an influx of new cases, and they're having to lock back down again. Not everyone will have to do that at the same time, but the whole world will have at the same time a lot of countries that are doing that at different times. So the economic fallout from this is likely to be disastrous. I don't know about catastrophic, but at least disastrous. But in any case, in the everyday life of normal people, we can't say for sure what's going to happen next. But probably the lockdown you're in is going to be much longer than you expect, and it's going to be followed by a series of partial openings and re-lockdowns. And I think that's going to happen repeatedly at different paces in different places for the next 1.5 to 2 years until there is a widely available, highly reliable vaccine. Given that, it would be wise for organizational leaders, people who run companies, people who lead families, to not make their plans like they're trying to hole up for 2 weeks and wait this out, but to make their plans as though the world changed and a new normal is going to have to be explored, discovered, and pioneered. All right, question 4, what about all the people who keep saying this is going to blow over or this is going to pass? This is going to pass. Everything passes. But it isn't going to blow over, and here's why. That metaphor is bad. That metaphor refers to a storm, like a hurricane or a tornado. I grew up in a place that had a lot of tornadoes, and you would go in the basement and hide under the furniture, and you'd wait for the sirens to stop or the wind to die or the sky to blue out, and you'd come outside with all the neighbors and you'd go in the middle of the street and you'd look around and you kind of survey the damage and kind of celebrate that no one died if no one died. The problem is, when we come out of the basement this time, we go out in the middle of the street and we talk to our neighbor, we have brought the tornado with us, or they have. This time the storm, the catastrophic natural event, lives inside our bodies, at least some of our bodies. Every time we come out of the basement, we spin the storm up again. The metaphors and the machines and the narratives that we have grown accustomed to using to think about bad things happening do not apply here for the most part. This is new to the human family, and we don't know how to think about it right yet. And that's one of the reasons why we keep saying things that are wrong. The next question is sort of follows that one, and it's basically, isn't that kind of defeatist, or isn't that a little bit doomsday-ish? I can understand that point of view. However, I would probably say no. No, it isn't. Everyone isn't dying, just a lot of people are. Every economy isn't completely decimated, some will be. And there is so much affluence in many of these economies that if people just decided to learn to live simply and generously, that would recover, not most, but a lot of the lost ground. The thing is, this is difficult. This is happening. It is hard to believe, but it's happening. And there is no going back. But there is going forward. And we need people. We need people to be wise. We need people to be a little submissive. Not like roll over and show your belly submissive, but like, can we be for the community and maybe stand up for our responsibilities more feverishly than we stand up for our rights? We need people to be brave. We need people to be creative. We need to create a future that responsibly takes account of today. And that brings me to my last question for today. Where do we lay responsibility for this? And really the question is, why doesn't God do something about it? That's a really big question. Probably too big for a YouTube video. Certainly too big for a YouTube video that has other questions in it. But I think to that I would say things like, we don't know what God is doing. Also, it's worthwhile to examine whether or not you're expecting God to intervene in a situation that we have created for ourselves, or if we're thinking that God is orchestrating this and created this disease, this devil, this monster. Depending on your theology, your kind of home theology, you're going to be predisposed to think that God is doing this, or that God isn't doing something that we wonder why he isn't. Like many of you, I have experienced plenty of loss. I have experienced the miraculous, and I have experienced moments where I thought the miraculous would happen and it didn't. and I have never received an explanation for the disparity. What I know is that the God revealed in Jesus is kind and good and strong. And that when asked a similar question, Jesus made the point that sometimes when people die, it isn't because something. It just is. Let's learn to live with an adult faith and live wisely in the face of beautiful mystery and horrible mystery. But on the issue of responsibility and on the issue of living with God in this, I'm making other videos to kind of dialogue with you about that. There are some videos on praying in lockdown that touch that, and I'm going to be creating a series soon on kind of lessons in leadership that I am gleaning as I reflect on how people have led, different people have led inside this coronavirus phenomenon. So stay tuned for that. Don't be afraid, but be wise.